But the feminist movement will basically turn everything upside down and tell you that everything that is nice is actually a hidden form of sexism against women, and that it's all terrible, toxic, patriarchal behavior, and that we should fight against it. So yeah, the Me Too movement definitely spiraled out of control, and it spiraled out of control to an extent where it didn't just influence like our social interaction between men and women or young boys and girls even, but it influenced our legal system.
Hello everyone, I am Magda and I am honored to be your host and to welcome you to the new episode of the Edictum Dei podcast. This podcast is part of the Edictum Online project, which aims at keeping the conversation on important topics going during these times when hosting in-person events and conferences is a lot more difficult than it used to be in the past. As I believe you already know, Edictum hasn't backed down from tackling the pressing issues of our time, and today makes no exception. But before we get to the subject, I would like to introduce to you my guest, Eva Vladingbroek. Eva, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you, Magda. It's wonderful to be here.
So we will be talking about the Me Too movement and feminism. But first, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Ooh, yeah, where to start then? So I'm 25. I'm Dutch, as your listeners probably know. I have a background in law, so we already talked about that a little bit. We have that in common. I studied philosophy of law. Would very much recommend you doing that too. And I've been a little bit all over the place. Actually, I've been in university. I started a PhD. I actually had a political adventure as well. And then after that, I went into media, and now I'm back into law. Oh. So right now,
that's a twist.
Yeah, it's a twist. So currently, the world has changed, as everybody knows, beyond recognition sometimes in the last 2 years. And now I work for a law firm that basically focuses on fighting the COVID mandates in the Netherlands. So yeah, I never thought that I would be going back into law, but now I feel like I can make my legal knowledge useful.
If my parents watch this, I think they'll be very glad to know that it's a possibility to go back to law.
It is. You might be surprised. Even if you think you're going to leave it behind you for years, you might, you never know what's going to happen. So now I'm in this law firm, and I still do all of my, media interviews, things like that on the side. But the law firm is like my main,
that's your main
job right now. Yeah,
that's your main job. Yeah, that's great. I would ask you, how would you define the Me Too movement? I mean, we have seen, and I remember seeing some posts on social media. I follow a lot of people from the States, and I even saw it posted by some girls in Romania, and there's even a Twitter page, Me Too Romania. But I was younger then. I think in high school, and it didn't spark so much interest in me back then. So I would ask you, how would you define it, and how did you get interested in studying it? I know you studied it for your contracts law course, and so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Yeah, so the Me Too movement actually started as a tweet. So it wasn't a movement. It started as a hashtag on a post, which was about sexual deviant behavior, or transgressive sexual behavior. And sort of by chance, actually, it became this whole movement. I would say almost the largest feminist movement of our century, for sure. And the Me Too movement started out as something that basically just said women who asked for awareness. That's at least how they presented it when it came to sexual transgressive behavior. So sexual behavior that wasn't wanted, that was uncalled for, often in sort of a position of power where there was a power dynamic between the perpetrator and the victim, so to say, which you could think in of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, we wouldn't condone any type of transgressive sexual behavior. That's something that should be punished. Sounds like it could be a noble thing. But as we all know, the Me Too movement turned out to be something that is way bigger than that, and that became much less clear what it actually was about.
Because I think we can agree that if there are the sexual harassment and all these problems, people who do these things should be punished. We can agree on that. I think everybody can agree on that.
Yeah.
But I think it progressed to something more than just bringing awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, everybody agrees on that. I mean, our legal system agrees on that, right? We have laws in place that say that you cannot do those things. Naturally so, because they are not moral. They're unethical. You shouldn't touch people that don't want to be touched by you. Clearly. Yeah. But this
should be obvious.
Well, for most people who are good, it is obvious. But obviously there are people who don't abide by these rules or ethics or morals. But the Me Too movement, like you said, has definitely sort of transpired into something that's way bigger than just, very apparent behavior that we deem wrong. Now, at the height of the Me Too movement, it almost seemed like everything could be a Me Too offense. So you would notice that the interactions between men and women would become more tensed almost, because it wasn't quite clear what could land you up in a Me Too situation. So would, touching somebody against their will in a very aggressive manner is obviously something that we would recognize as being transgressive behavior. But what about, if you put your hand on a woman's shoulder?
Pat a woman on the shoulder,
hey, or even like, I don't know, winking at somebody or flirting with somebody or opening a door to someone. Is that already a Me Too moment, so to say? Turned out to be that oftentimes that seemed to be the case. So the lines were blurred a lot. And also what was very much a sort of an element of the Me Too movement, that is that a lot of women came forward with stories of things that had happened to them sometimes decades ago. So suddenly there was this huge wave of women everywhere who were accusing men that they worked with, men who were oftentimes in positions of power, of having done things that weren't right.
I think that kind of makes you feel like, are all men predators? It's just Me Too everywhere, and it's how do you behave in this situation? You just see it popping up, and thousands and hundreds of women, come out with these stories, and I'm thinking, okay, are all men that bad?
Well, that was definitely it had a domino effect to it, and there were definitely people within the Me Too movement that do think that way. So it became very apparent that the Me Too movement was not just about protecting women from sexual transgressive behavior, but it was it grew into this attack on men and grew into, a sort of, toxic masculinity, anti-toxic masculinity movement, where everything that a man could do that was once deemed normal for men or masculine behavior was seen as something that was oppressive to women or threatening to women or dangerous to women. So that's why, things like holding a door to somebody or pushing back their chair when you go and sit. Do we need men to do that? Maybe technically no. Do we like it?
Yeah.
Most women who don't see, an oppressor in men at every second of the day.
Think that's very polite of them.
Think it's polite. But the feminist movement will basically turn everything upside down and tell you that everything that is nice is actually a hidden form of sexism against women, and that it's all terrible, toxic, patriarchal behavior, and that we should fight against it. So, the Me Too movement definitely spiraled out of control, and it spiraled out of control to an extent where it didn't just influence our social interaction between men and women or young boys and girls even, but it influenced our legal system. And that is something that I wrote about for my master's when I finished philosophy of law. And that is where I would say it gets even more dangerous. It's not just when you start to incorporate these cultural and social beliefs that are, in my opinion, very wrong, but you give them legal. Heaviness and legal power, because that has consequences for the people that you're accusing. And, we know that just being accused of having done something, which is a Me Too moment, for example, is oftentimes enough to get people to be convicted in this sort of trial by media type of situation.
Yeah, because as we were talking before, there's the presumption of innocence, and that kind of, as you were saying, it was taken out of the way, because if a woman says that she was aggressed, and you didn't really have to know what happened there, you just had to believe her, know?
That was one of the chants of the Me Too movement, #BelieveAllWomen.
Yeah.
If you even questioned a statement that a woman made, you would be, horrible sexist, and you would prove their point, kind of, to say, which if you know anything about the law, which I know you do, you know that cannot
go out well.
No, that cannot work out well. You know, we have the presumption of innocence for a reason. If somebody accuses you of something, and especially if the state does it through the prosecutor, it is their responsibility to prove that you did it, because otherwise everybody could be locked up for just about anything. You know, in a liberal democracy where the rule of law still has some force, the presumption of innocence is one of the most crucial principles of the law.
Yeah.
So, well, with the Me Too movement, that kind of went out of the window, because if you say believe all women, the only thing we need to know is, are you a woman? Did you accuse a man? Okay, the man is guilty, the woman is in the clear. Yeah, it's done. And that's kind of what happened. So what these women did, what the Me Too movement was founded on in terms of ideas, is that we here in the West have a rape culture. That's the literature behind these ideas. So rape culture meaning, if you read like the way that they phrase that, even like the definition of a rape culture, already in the 80s, they talked about it in feminist literature. They say things like, oh, it's a culture in which these types of sexual aggressive behavior is not just like sort of looked past, but it's also celebrated. It's embraced. It's embraced, not just condoned, but embraced, which I wonder in what type of world they live. Because if you read those types of definitions, or the way that these feminists speak about, you know, our societies, I just think, okay, this could maybe go in a country where there is Sharia law, where you know, where a woman who's raped has to have, I don't know how many numbers of witnesses to prove it, and if she doesn't, then it's, you know, extramarital sex, and that could get her to be punished. There, I could see like some sort of argument for her saying this is a rape culture, but in Western Christian societies where rape is not just condemned, but you know, you go to jail for very lengthy times. Hard to say that we have a rape culture, right?
Yeah, and it also it doesn't feel like it, you know, out in the world. It's just, I've been to the States, for example, and I've really enjoyed it, and I did not sense that happening, you know. And I was there for a short time, and of course I cannot make general statements, but it did not feel like it, you know.
No, I don't think most women feel like that, and that's the thing with the feminist movement, is that they create victims. So I think, you know, at least when I speak about the feminist movement, I talk about the modern feminist movement, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But so to go back to sort of this idea of the rape culture that we were supposed to live in, these women said we need to transform that. It's an urgent matter that we transform that to something called a consent culture. And that is sort of what happened to a lot of legal systems throughout Europe, especially in Western Europe. It all started out with Sweden, of course. But yeah, also in the Netherlands, they've now been able to what they call modernize our sex laws. And the idea of that is that when it comes to rape, for example, that you don't prove rape just by proving that there has been coercion, because they say that's too hard to prove. But rape can already exist in the moment that you have non-consensual sex with somebody. So if there is a sexual act that happened, but one person didn't feel like they wanted it, it's basically what it is, feels like they want it, then
that's very hard to prove, you know.
Oh yeah, you would say law. Like it's not much easier to prove that than to prove coercion, which would sort of take away their argument. But that's not the point. So I think it actually is sort of the point that they say, no, we have to believe again all women. And you create a society in which there is something that can happen, which I sort of coined to be contractualization of sex. So that's like the consequence of this consent law. Because, you know, when we talk about contracts, that's usually where consent comes in. So I make you an offer, you accept the offer. Yeah. Okay, there's consent on both sides. We go along with our...
We have our deal.
Our deal, our economic transition. So you do something for me, I pay you for it. That's what contract law is about. Or you make a promise to each other. But now what they've been able to do with this sort of this consent culture is take sex as something that is now in the realm of contracts. Because obviously when you think about risk management, for example, coercion, like being raped with force, is not something that you can risk manage. It's like, it's not in the nature of coercion. It's like the opposite of what it is. But when you think about consent, that's something that you can manage. That's something that you can lay down in writing. And that's exactly what happened. So during the height of the Me Too movement, there were feminist groups going around campuses in America, for example, going out, handing out consent forms, like physical consent forms to students, saying, if you want to, endeavor in a sexual act with somebody, use this because it will keep you safe. Mm-hmm. Because that's always how they present it, right? They present it as something that keeps people from harm.
So I think this idea that you were saying, the contractualization of human relationships is very dangerous, because we know, and from a Christian perspective, humans are made in the image of God. And of course, relationships are very essential, to us. And you just can't limit those and reduce them to, just that piece of paper, Yeah. And we have seen that when it comes to the legalization of gay marriages, for example, when they were saying that marriage is just this act. Well, no, marriage and human relationships in general are much more than that, Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how would you... I think the feminist movement kind of paved the way for the Me Too movement, but then they sort of influenced each other. And how would you characterize this modern version of feminism that we were talking about?
Right. Yeah. So modern day feminism, I usually make the the distinction in the beginning of a conversation, and then I'll just say feminism. Mm-hmm. But for the viewers, for the listeners, modern day feminism, I could argue already started after the first wave. So there are, in feminist literature, there are multiple waves, movements of feminism. We're now in maybe the fourth. But what modern day feminism is about, I argued, has nothing to do with what people conceive is original feminism. So when we talk about, voting rights, for example, that's a feminism that, type of feminism that most Western Christian countries are on board with.
Do I want to vote? Yes, I do.
Do you want to vote? Yeah. Yes. Are there men who think that you shouldn't vote? Maybe like a handful, but our society has accepted that, and that's something that is a result of, well, a lot of things you could say of, people who fought for it, women who fought for it, but maybe also just, societal changes, cultural changes. Like the Western world was ready for that. Mm-hmm. But the feminist movement, again, as happens with a lot of these leftist movements, don't stay with their initial requests. They hardly ever do. Mm-hmm. So nowadays, the feminist movement is all about something like intersectionality.
Can you define that for us a little bit?
Yeah.
I think it's a very complex word.
Intersectionality kind of means it's the idea that you fight for all these different subgroups within society. So all these different minorities that are, according to oftentimes the leftist movements, the feminist movements, are deprived of their rights. So they are suppressed by a majority. They're suppressed by an oppressor. Mm-hmm. It's a very Marxist
idea. Yeah.
It's incredibly Marxist. So the feminist movement now is a neo-Marxist movement. So it's not about class in terms of the, economic class, but it's about, okay, there is one oppressor in society. Who is that? Well, we all know who that is. It's the white heterosexual Western men, Christian men. And then every other group is oppressed by that group. And so it's women, obviously, because we're feminists and we have to fight against the patriarchy, but it's not just us. It's also the gays. It's also the transsexuals. It's also, refugees, ethnic minorities within our societies. Mm-hmm. And
so it's sort of a mix there,
It's a cult of victimhood.
It makes it very hard to be clear about things, because when you're talking about so many things at the same time, what are you even talking about, right?
Yeah, well, their interests have nothing to do with each other, obviously. Like, my interest as a woman in society would not necessarily I wouldn't have the same interest as somebody who's transgender. Mm-hmm. Actually, maybe my interest would conflict with those of, who mm-hmm. say that they're transgender. Let alone, what does my interest as a woman have to do with the interest of a refugee who's male who came from Syria? Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't mean that we have the same interest at all, but because we are suffering, so
we are victims.
We are mm-hmm. victims of the same group, the same oppressor. We all have to stick together, mm-hmm. which creates very odd situations. We've seen, the sort of the weird alliance between modern day feminists and, Islam, for example, mm-hmm. which you would think doesn't work very well, but yet you see all these feminists in the West defend Islam mm-hmm. and say, all refugees are welcome here and things mm-hmm. like that. It all because of the fact that they see themselves and these other groups as the same.
We have to stick together.
We are in the same, mm-hmm. Boat here.
Boat.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
because they're all victims. So this is sort of at the core of it now, this sort of neo-Marxist victimization of different minorities, even though women aren't a minority, you know, like it all just is mixed together.
We're pretty numerous, I'd say.
Yeah, and that explains also why, you know, when you go to a feminist march, which I've never been like, you know, to a feminist march to march with them, but only to look at. It's almost like a freak show. Yeah. And you would see there, I remember like the first time I went in Amsterdam, you could see people waving around like Palestine flags, so, you know, like Palestinian flags. And I was like, why did we...
What does this have to do with the feminist movement?
Well, again, if you think that feminism is about women's rights, it doesn't make any sense. But if you know that it is about a larger neo-Marxist ideal, then it makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Yeah, you're like, okay, not surprising. And that was most clear to me the moment I saw people waving around communist flags.
Oh my God, yeah.
You know, so Western women who have no idea what communism is, who have no idea what it does to societies or how it destructs entire generations, like they have no idea. They're waving around a communist flag because, you know, we're
all feminists.
Yeah, we're all victims.
Yeah, so we talked about intersectionality, so we can move a little bit to this modern version of feminism because I think we took a detour there. So we could go back to some characteristics, you know, of modern day feminism. So is this victimization, you know, and what would be some other things you would say?
Oh, that they completely reject the idea of femininity. So modern day feminists, some of them, or a lot of them, so, you know, people will sometimes say that I characterize them too much, but if you look at the hardcore fourth wave feminist, those people, you often can't even recognize them to be female. Because they, again, sort of this intersectionality, this fluidity of sexuality, of their gender, their sex, is so prominent. Every line is blurred. So there are no norms. You know, actually, that's like maybe the one thing that I would say categorizes not just modern day feminism, but modern day postmodern leftist thinking is this idea that there is no such thing as a norm. That's why they hate Christianity so much. Yeah. You know, because that imposes very clear norms to people. Has a very clear moral base. But, you know, in leftist modern thought, anything goes. So this, you know, you'll see these women walking around who don't really look like women, who say that everything that, you know, the fact that you have long hair is not because you want to have long hair, it's because the patriarchy tells you so. You know, you are clearly being suppressed here and told to do something that you deeply in your soul don't want, but, you know, you are... Again,
I actually like my long hair, you know.
I'm sure you do. So do I, and I like yours. But they will say that we are brainwashed by the patriarchy, that we have been so...
To look a certain way or to...
Yes, because everything in their eyes is a social construct. Nothing exists, you know, by the grace of God or by the grace of nature or tradition. Everything is a social construct created by oppressors to keep their victims small.
So I think this idea that... gender and male and female are social constructs is actually very dangerous to Christian women, because from the first pages of the Bible, we read and we see that men and women have been made in the image of God, and they both bear that image in unique ways. So when you tear apart these differences, you know, you have nothing. You're left with nothing. And I really like what Elizabeth Elliot has said, that the physical is... the physical reality is symbolic to the spiritual reality, you know, and you just tear these things down and you're just left with a lot of confusion, you know. And how would you say that the modern day feminism affects this idea of family, you know, traditional family? Yeah, well, nuclear family.
It hates it. Yeah. So you're completely right. Obviously, you know, if you have a movement where you say that everything is fluid, everything is sort of up to your personal perception or your feeling of how you identify, and that can change to like within an hour, or one day I'm this, next day I'm that. It's all up to you. Obviously, the Bible speaks of Adam and Eve. It's not that complicated, right? It's a man and a woman, and there is nothing in between. So it's, you know, it completely contradicts that, of course. So that's not something that works in their favor at all. And it's the same thing with the family. So, you know, if a man and a woman have a child, form a family, again, you need to have a man and a woman to be able to do that. You know, nowadays the feminists will say, oh no, but men can have their periods too, which is obviously in total insanity. So you have to, again, with what is interesting about this is this reality, what most people perceive to be true, because it is a reflection of again, of the most pivotal elements of our lives: family, man, woman, children, together, in married, in front of the eyes of God. If that's their core issue, because it goes against everything that they say.
It feels like these days a woman could be anything except a stay-at-home mother, even pro-life mother, with children. It's just anything goes. Even being a man is more feminist than being a stay-at-home mom to them. It just feels that way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's funny because that's true. That's definitely how they view it. They think that you are not oppressed if you work for a boss 9 to 5, but you would be oppressed if you stay at home and take care of your kids. Yeah. And that is definitely, again, a difference with maybe, the more sane feminists out there who will say women should have the choice. Mm-hmm. I still think that when I speak from my personal thought, and I think for a societal view as well, that there is nothing that could make people happier than to start a family. Mm-hmm. I don't think that a career could ever replace that in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, I really don't think so. When you ask people who are about to die what their most treasured moments are in their life, will they tell you about a day they had at work, or a job that they got one time, or a career move? No, they'll tell you about the people they love. They'll tell you about their family. They'll say, my children. Yeah. And
I think they say women have a choice, but I was looking, for example, at the feminist Insta page, and the thing you see most often there, is this line: womanhood does not imply motherhood, and if you have a choice, you present both the options, but I think they just try to tell you that you don't have to be a mother to be happy or fulfilled. You have to have this career, and you have to be like men, to be strong and independent. And I think you're not really left with a choice, but with the pressure, Yeah. When you just see, I did not see a mother of 5 children on this Insta page,
No, of course
you do not see that.
That page is disgusting, by the way. I follow it for the mere reason of being able to know what's going on. So you need to know your enemies. You need to know what is being pushed into the minds of young women all across the globe, because it's terrifying to see how many people follow that page and like how many likes those posts get. And you just see the most vile things on there, the most, completely anti-biblical, very anti-truth, horrible things, and very also low motivational things. So what these pages always tell people is like, oh, life has to be somewhat easy for you. It's okay to be overweight. It's okay to not take care of yourself, because again, all these standards that are imposed on you are all patriarchal nonsense standards, oppressive standards anyway. So you just let yourself go. Nothing has to be expected of you. You don't have to have children if you don't want to, because having children is just a hassle. Like you'll have to change diapers and things.
You should hustle for a career.
Yeah, because that's where, again, it's funny how in a way they're incredibly neo-Marxist, but they're also very capitalist in the sense that they're very material. So everything is about like your work and your career and the money that you make and your personal empowerment. It's a very selfish movement, of course. And you're totally right. Like having children is not something that they would ever recommend, because again, you are doing something for the patriarchy. You are giving up your freedom for the wishes of this society, of God or a man or another man.
And you should be liberated from that.
Yeah, that you should be liberated from, and you should be able to do whatever you want. And yes, it's true. If you have a kid, there is no whatever you want, because it's not anymore just about you.
You have to sacrifice your needs and to put the child first, because he needs the care. Yeah, I'm thinking, since we're speaking about children, I think this is also a very important topic to our conversation about feminism. I know it's a very hot topic, abortion, and so I was looking at, I think it was a video on live action on the Instagram page, and there was this woman who was going into a clinic to abort a child, but she was of course undercover, and she was just saying that she wants to abort the child if it's a girl. And then that lady, she's just like, yeah, of course, whatever you want. If in a few weeks you will know what the baby's gender is, and you can just come and we will take care of it. I mean, how is that feminist? And would you say that it is? I think that's evil.
No,
really.
It's evil. It's
very
pure evil.
Yeah, it's very evil. And would you say that for the feminist to be a feminist, a modern feminist, it means nowadays to also stand for abortion?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because again, it's all about what you want. So it's your body, your choice. That and whatever happens inside your body is none of your it's not a problem.
It has nothing to do with you.
No, it has nothing to do with you. No, of course. Wow. I didn't see this video, but I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised in a way. Which is sad. But it doesn't surprise me. Abortion is something that by the feminist movement, the modern feminist movement is something that is celebrated. Mm-hmm. It's like, and
you see all those, I don't know if you've seen these TikTok videos of teenagers who had abortions and they just brag about it. And it gives you the chills. I mean,
yeah, because what type of examples did they have? What was that? I forgot her name now. This actress who was receiving a Golden Globe, I think, or maybe an Oscar. It was. I don't remember what her name was. And she was saying that she held up her trophy.
Yeah, she received that because she had an abortion. Yeah, I remember that.
It's sort of like implying like if I
would have had this child, I would not be here.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this whole crowd starts cheering.
Yeah.
It's like you're cheering on a woman that says, I traded my child for a piece of plastic or gold or whatever the hell it is. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's insane. And then all these young women who are watching this, or young children who look up to these Hollywood actresses and movie stars and think that's what I want to be, because let's face it, the glamour is interesting, especially when you're young. What are they going to walk home with the idea that, oh yeah, no, it's a very good thing for me to if I don't want that child, if it's inconvenient at that moment because I have my career to think of, then trade it out, and you'll get applauded for it later in life when you become very successful.
And then you'll go home and I'm pretty sure you'll be sad.
Yeah, because that's something that they obviously never show. So
and they also never talk about the the trauma, that women go after having abortions. And I think that's also very real. And there are lots of stories, about this, but they also, of course, they don't show this,
Yeah. Again, which is like what you would think is the bare minimum, right? Even if you take it out of the equation, which obviously for us is not hard, but for other people maybe, if you aren't sure where you stand on abortion, if you're not sure whether it should be illegal, legal, or somewhere in between, with the terms that should be lower or higher, if you haven't made up your mind yet, then the one thing I think should be a universal truth that we accept is that abortion is never something to celebrate. Never. Yeah. There's always pain, always. And that the fact that the feminist movement even tries to hide that and says like, no, this can be something that you can that you can celebrate, that you can feel joy from doing. I don't think that there is something, that you could sell that's possibly even more evil than that.
Yeah, I think that's true. Why would you say it's important for, I would say Christians, but I think people in general, to get informed about these things and to actually understand what they are about, these movements, feminism and Metoo, beyond what they are presented on social media and even on their own social media feeds? Because I often think that these are very biased feeds, because
of course
you get what you follow and you never get the other perspective. And so why would you say it's important for us to kind of dig deeper and understand these movements?
Well, it's important on multiple levels, but let's start with the most simple one, the personal one. So, I think it's very, like you said, with the debate about abortion, this is something that hurts people, the trauma that comes after it. The lifestyle that the feminist movement presents to young women is not one that's going to make them happy in general. Like when you go to these feminist marches, do they look happy?
They look angry.
They look angry. They look upset. They look lost. They often will say that they are depressed about a lot of things. And maybe the easier answer is not that you are depressed because a social construct or an oppressor is oppressing you and you're suffering from it. It's because you are doing things that go against the truth, or you believe in things that aren't truthful, that aren't moral, that are going to make you inherently unhappy, the life choices that you're making.
I think women need to take responsibility, with their lives, not just say men, the patriarchy is to blame, men are to blame. Let's just take responsibility for our own actions, and choices.
Yeah, and we do have responsibility in that. And I think that's something that in the abortion debate is something that, people don't like to talk about in the West at all. But, you have responsibility. We live in a society where it's very easy for young women and women in general to get by contraception. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to become pregnant, there are a million ways to not do that, apart from abstination. So it's not black and white, there's no, so you have responsibility. And I think that should be way more something that we should talk about way more openly in the West than we have so far. Because especially in where I'm from, in Holland, it's completely impossible to touch the subject of abortion without being labeled a far-right extremist. Mm-hmm. Completely impossible.
You cannot have a civil dialogue.
No, there is no civil dialogue when it comes to abortion. When you argue, for example, that the term should be lowered, because in Holland right now, you're allowed to abort babies up until 24 weeks. Mm-hmm. 24 weeks. By 24, with modern day medicine, you have babies that are viable when they're born too early at that time. Mm-hmm. But we are able to abort them, no questions asked. And if you argue maybe we should lower that term, just lowering, not saying, we should prohibit it, but lowering.
And take baby steps.
Crazy. Crazy. You want us back to the 50s.
You're anti-feminist.
Yeah, you're an anti-feminist. You want us back into the kitchen. You want to eradicate all women's rights. And, that's how they manage, like how they operate. They use these sort of hyperbolic terms to shame their opponents, to be like, and then to also indoctrinate again young children and women that, if you listen to those women who say that, then you're gonna have no rights, and that's how they sort of keep the movement going. So yeah, on a personal level, I think it would be very important to have role models of people who live lives that go against what the feminist movement do, more traditional lives, maybe at least more traditional personal choices, women who have children, and have them hopefully have a more prominent voice in the debate, but also just showing, like, leading by example, showing that that having children is not something that will lock you down to your kitchen.
It's not oppressive.
Yeah. And it's the most horrible thing, and that you'll be depressed for the rest of your life, but that it gives great joy. Yeah. And that it's the most beautiful thing that you can do. And I was lucky enough to be raised by parents who always told me that, both my mom and my dad. Not just my mother, but my father too. When he speaks about the greatest things that he's done in life, which is the most heartwarming thing, he talks about me and my brother. Yeah. That's a very different way of growing up. So, but that's personal. So yeah, if you don't have that on a family level, then, society, if the only thing that you see is the feminist page on Instagram, and you watch all the typical like mainstream media reports, and we have another one coming, So yeah, what else is institutions are incredibly important. Which again is hard. If the churches are empty, which they are in Western Europe, then where are you going to hear this? So it's not an easy. There's not a quick fix to this. Again, it's something that will. They say there's this saying that I really like. It takes 3 generations to raise a gentleman. I think that's true. So this is something that we will need to have sort of a we need to have patience, and we need to persist and have hope that there are going to be multiple.
I think the church does have this responsibility of showing, and leading by example, and showing that family is not the most terrible place you can be, but the most beautiful one. Yeah. I think that's, and I think we oftentimes fail at that. We fail at that because of our sinful nature, and of course, thankfully there is a lot of grace. But I don't think we should throw away the whole idea of the family and a beautiful family and happy family just because there are, bad people out there or bad examples. And domestic violence, of course, is a very big problem. And I will say especially here in Romania. But I think we should show that there's this other way, It's not just a domestic violence, but family can mean a totally beautiful thing, And I think those are pretty important things.
Yeah. Well, that is the norm, I would say. So it's not just what the left does best is to eradicate norms and say that everything that is a norm is an oppressive standard, and that there are no norms, and they make every single exception into the norm. Even though they say there are no norms. But so they'll say the sort of the example that you just mentioned of domestic violence, which is horrible. Obviously, that's not the norm for a family. Nobody would argue that, but they would like to
just march on that and just show you that family is bad,
which is what they always do. They will always say that the small exception of something that could go wrong in a good concept is the norm, and then say, but there are no norms. That's
very chaotic.
That's chaos is exactly what the left wants, and family is the opposite of chaos.
Yeah, so I think that's very, very important. Thank you, Eva, for this great conversation. Maybe we should, we've talked about a lot of problems that feminism has, that modern feminism has, that the Metoo movement has probably brought. But what would you say to our listeners to just maybe give them some hope, not be left in this, we have lots of problems, but where do we go from here,
Well, what the good thing is always about why I think that we are going to most definitely win this fight is that leftism and these feminist movements, they go against nature. So they go against God. And the only response to that can be is a counter reaction, which you can already see happening. So I see among younger generations that even though, they have a lot of the feminist movements, the leftist ideas have a lot of ground within certain institutions like university, within the media, mainstream media, there's also a counter narrative that's also growing. So you can see this sort of return to traditionalism in some ways that I think our parents' generation, for example, did not necessarily see, because they were the first ones to ride the wave of the 70s and the 80s, and that was a very different time. But now you can see people our age, people as young as beginning 20 or even younger, who say, no, I want to go to church. I'll see what it's about, because I feel like this sort of very atheist agenda that I feel like mostly people like in their 30s, 40s, or our parents, 50s, 60s, have been exposed to, that is kind of dead. I don't know if you experience the same, but in the West, I feel like, it's not as fashionable anymore to bash Christianity. I feel like that doesn't fly as well anymore. So with that, you can see people who now, start to become, they don't know anything about the church. They don't know anything about Christianity. They've never seen a Bible.
They start to get interested,
But at least they're not completely biased against it because they don't know anything about it, So there's this, I feel like the sort of hardcore atheism, sort of really that generation is starting to lose sort of power.
Lose ground.
So I feel like within the younger generations are definitely the ones that we need to sort of be able to reach. And that's, I think, why it's so important that you guys do these types of podcasts and that you have these types of events and that you use the channels that they are on to reach them, because obviously they're not going to be reached through the mainstream media. But then again, young people don't really watch TV anymore. So we have a window of opportunity here
through social media.
That is definitely growing. And I think that the church, has a crucial role in that and needs to sort of, get to young people, not with sort of, sugar-coated messages. I think that's also a classic mistake that, the generation of, for example,
but with the real deal.
Yeah, the real deal. We don't need, I think I always told my dad who and my mother, they both work in the classical music industry. So also this sort of institution that has lost power, that is deemed less important. The arts are devalued, in our society as, again, Christianity, same thing. All goes together. Beauty, good, truth, it's not a surprise.
They're tied up.
Yeah, they're all tied up. And then I see, like, in their generation, I see some people who say, we need to get more young people to go to classical music, concerts. So we need to get them in the concert hall. And then what they do is they say, we need to put a rapper next to it. And it always flops, Young people we want to hear Mozart, we want to hear Bach. We want to hear it on almost a transcendental level, because that's what that does to people.
We crave that,
And that's something people can feel. That can resonate with you, even if you've never heard, or you don't know anything about classical music. I feel like it's the same thing with God. So, if you try to make Christianity fun, And if you try to like sugarcoat it and make it like hip, that's when people are like, oh, but this is just ingenuine. That's not what I'm looking for. You know, that doesn't resonate with people. Whereas when you tell a message of truth
and of grace, you know, because I think at the deepest level, what we truly need, you know, is the grace of God and the forgiveness of God, because we are all sinful in nature. And I think that, you know, we don't need, you know, these movements to make us feel better or to make us feel accepted. You know, the grace of God does that in our lives, you know, and I think that's an important message to give out to people, because I think especially the younger generation is looking for meaning everywhere. You know, I think it's looking for meaning everywhere, and I believe Christianity is where you can find that at the deepest level, you know.
Absolutely, more than anywhere else, of course. And that's, obviously, I would say the heart, the core of all these issues is exactly that, is that the left-wing movements, these left-wing ideas, these modern ideas have grown because Christianity in the West and well, anywhere actually has decayed.
Has weakened,
So if we manage to revive Christian values and ideas and faith in people, then that's going to make a world of a difference, because that's solid, you know. If you believe in God, if you believe in the grace of God, then you don't need a feminist to tell you, oh, you're fine the way you are. No,
you're enough, you know.
You're enough. No, you're not enough. No. You work hard, but and you know, and then you will hopefully also receive a lot more light than you could ever if you stay in that dark, miserable, ugly modern world.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Eva. Thank you so much again. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So did I.
Thank you for watching, and I hope we hope you found this helpful. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media.